We are finally at the end of the month of the Mega Review for Edge of Fate, and today we are talking everything Endgame. Once again, I don't have current raid footage for B-roll, and if you think that's an indicator of opinions to come, well, you're probably right. Conquests are the replacement for GM Nightfall, since those got the boot with Edge of Fate for no good discernible reason. These consist of pre-existing activities with a set of fixed modifiers at a fixed difficulty. Higher power level conquests grant higher tier loot, and very large amounts of that loot. While the power level is fixed, you can enter once you're 40 levels or less under the power of the conquest. They are not great. For starters, they are one and done. You can do them a single time and then never again, unless you're helping someone do theirs and you don't get loot. So one time. This is a complete 180 for GM Nightfalls, which were basically made to be farmed. I know that when they first came out, they were basically just for the title, but still farm them. But the philosophy changed over time, and now they're something worthy of running in their own right. And to be honest, I don't think most people are going to do all of the conquests for a title alone. At least the average person probably won't. Raid challenges are one of the few notable exceptions that I can think of, but even then, you get double loot for challenges, so my group just tends to do them if the challenge is not that much of a pain in the ass anyway. And all of that is just completely gone. To be honest, I don't really know why. I understand not wanting some of the quote-unquote easier endgame to be farmed for loot religiously, which is why the old Conqueror node worked the way it did, being a strikeout system, which meant that you couldn't just farm the easiest GM every week. But GM still required a good amount of both preparation, good execution of fundamentals, and a decent amount of thumb skill, as well as a basic level of coordination with your team. All of that to say, if you were good enough to farm GMs, you should probably just be allowed to. On top of that, they don't even really qualify as endgame activities, since you can just overlevel them if you want to. I wouldn't recommend overleveling these contests, since you're going to be waiting a while to actually play them, but the fact that these things don't have some kind of contest modifier enabled is asinine. Why are the hardest activities in the game able to be overleveled? Part of the difficulty is the enemy power delta. In fact, it's probably the largest part of the difficulty, and seeing that removed means that all of the difficulty is in the modifiers. Notably avant-guard, which I hate with a burning passion. Let me be abundantly clear. I hate avant-guard, and not in the way that I hate Thunderlord, where there's nuance to the statement and a whole 2-minute ramble. I just despise this thing. Straight up, no meme, dispense as written, statement as is, I do not like the avant-guard modifier. Avant-guard is a loadout restriction requiring only the use of new gear in every single armor and weapon slot. Sound bad off rip, until you remember that exotics exist, and Bungie also remembered they existed and realized they needed some way to integrate exotics into the system. Problem is, they picked probably one of the worst ways to do it. Certain exotics are marked as featured exotics and are treated as new gear for that season for the purpose of both the damage boost and the damage resist, as well as for avant-guard. Why do I hate it? Forced build crafting direction. Pre-Edge of Fate, modifiers were fixed. Those modifiers did not necessarily force you to build in a given direction. If it was Arc Surge Week, there was no requirement to use any arc damage at all. You could avoid it like the plague. There was just a really strong incentive to. This is the equivalent of Bungie saying, hey, you want to throw in arc weapons? We'll give you 25% more damage if you do. There was a strong incentive to build towards arc damage, but you were entirely free to ignore them with only minor punishments at worst. Cook however you want to. Go nuts. The world is your oyster. Avant-guard, don't got any of that shit. This is Bungie turning off your stove, throwing your frying pan against the wall, and saying, fuck you, we're making lasagna today. Now, if you already wanted lasagna, this is fine. But if you were making pancakes for dinner, there's a bit of a problem there. If you've got a great build, but it uses an exotic that isn't featured, tough shit, you can't use it. And as someone who loves messing around with exotic class item builds, I don't like it. At all. All of the hard work I put into build crafting doesn't matter because my favorite exotics don't have a shiny blue badge. You know how I said that Bungie was going to try some things and that not all of them would stick? Yeah, this is one of those things. You really did try, Bungie, and I appreciate it. I really do. But please get rid of this modifier. It sucks, and I don't think a single person likes it. Locked loadouts were fine for GMs, and they should be fine here. And, speaking of GMs, yeah, those are just gone. I don't know why they did this, outside of the fact that maybe the GM Nightfall loot wasn't going to be updated. But I'm really not a fan of the fact that some of the hardest stuff in the game is just gone. We used to have repeatable, farmable endgame content for a fire team of 3 that gave good, relevant rewards. And that activity just doesn't exist anymore, and the suitable replacement has yet to appear. Like, I really wish I had more to say about GMs, but there's really just not a whole lot more to say about GMs. But then we get to raids. Look, at the time that I'm writing this script, Power Delta changes on raids and dungeons has been reversed. Having said that, I'm going to talk about it anyway because it's possible that they will return in the future in some form. So, for those of you who are just tuning in and are not aware, raids and dungeons, as of like a week ago, I think, used to have a static -10 Power Delta. To me, this didn't necessarily feel that bad most of the time. I thought it was appropriate for endgame activities to place you under level, although bosses actually really just suck. The Delta combined with the ammo problems meant that bosses like War Priest, which were typically a pretty easy 2-phase free Edge of Fate for my group, ended up being 3 or sometimes even 4 phases. I hope that if static deltas do ever come back, the loot incentive is much higher. But circling back to ammo problems for a second, let's talk about them as they relate to endgame specifically. I touched on this a little bit last video, but basically the ammo changes make boss encounters feel awful to run, especially if you're on a roll that prevents you from genning ammo. These old raid encounters were absolutely not designed with this ammo system in mind. Obviously, given that they significantly predated it, and they do not play well with this system at all. It just constantly feels like I'm begging the game to give me ammo while also praying that my teammates have enough ammo to actually do damage. I don't even entirely know what I want to happen to the ammo system, but something's gotta happen for raids to feel like I have a decent amount of power ammo so I can get through the damn thing and just get my subpar to mediocre loot. Which is the reason that a lot of people aren't running raids nowadays anyway. The loot is just not good. Legacy raids, across the board, did not get their loot pools updated, meaning that loot is pretty much just by default power crept by newer offerings. For the Edge of Fate, I was excited to run a lot of these raids for the loot. I still needed a God Roll Praedit. I still needed a God Roll Supremacy. I still wanted a whole F-load of Salvation's Edge weapons. And all desire to get those red borders has just been killed for me. I think the only loot I really want to chase is a God Roll Cataclysmic, and even then, that's mostly because 4th Time gets around some of the ammo problems we're having right now. I understand not wanting to update all of the legacy raid loot at once, because that is a lot of work. But we can't even level through raids right now. Yeah, it's dropping loot at 200 power. What is even the point of running a raid right now? Hell, I have yet to run Desert Perpetual, and it's the newest raid in the game. I have little to no desire to play the raid because it drops Tier 1 loot from an endgame activity. What are we doing? You're telling me that the same quality of loot I am unable to obtain through the portal because I'm too high of a power level is supposed to incentivize me to play some of the hardest content in the game? I know the feat system allows you to get to higher tier loot, but I've heard next to nothing about any of the raid weapons. Normally, people would be going berserk for these things. Again, I don't really know what needs to happen here, but clearly something needs to be done about the loot incentives in both Legacy raids and the Desert Perpetual. If I'm being honest, this problem is just even worse on dungeons. At least with raids, I have an excuse to get together with friends and actually engage my brain for once with this game. But I just have not felt any desire to run a dungeon because of the loot problem. And I think the main problem that we're currently having is that everything that was an end-game activity that is actually worth running can now be over-leveled. And at that point, there's barely any challenge. Combat difficulty was one of the main ways that this game had to increase difficulty, when the solution to endgame at difficulty activities is just grind more, instead of actually having to play in a manner expressive of both good fundamentals and thumb skill, the endgame kind of just ceases to exist in a meaningful way. The contest modifier was a perfect example of this. Previously, GMs would place you at a minus 25 delta, which is now minus 50, and there was not a damn thing you could do about it. Past a certain point, leveling did not matter. Past that point, the answer was, for lack of a better concise term, get good. In order to get the best loot in the game, you had to display a high degree of knowledge, understanding of fundamentals, and a moderate amount of skill to succeed. Now Contest is used in world tiers, which I do enjoy. I've spoken my piece on. And the contest mode raid, which it absolutely needs to be in. And that's legitimately it. Okay, I forgot about master raids, but we already talked about why raids aren't worth it to run right now, so really, really don't want to run a master raid right now. But the number one problem I have right now with the endgame is that the best stuff in the game no longer comes from the hardest activities in the game. Now, it's the result of a near-endless power grind, and then just getting lucky. Higher tier loot simply comes from just playing the game enough. There's no requirement that you even be that particularly good at it. Before Edge of Fate, you needed to do the hardest activities in the game to actually receive base loot. Raid loot had the best perks and origin traits on it, or at the very least had those traits much earlier than the rest of the weapon pool. Nowadays, you just gotta power grind as much as possible and then get lucky for tier 5s. There's no incentive to run a raid or dungeon right now because the gear you get won't necessarily be better than what you currently have. Outside of ranged dungeons, GMs just no longer exist, Conquests can be over-leveled, and, I hate to say it, but is the endgame dead? God, I hope not, but it's really not looking good. GM Nightfalls were the endgame activity of choice for many players, and those are just gone, and they don't have a viable replacement. Raids are still here, but they suffer from the endgame incentive problem where they don't drop tiered loot, and apparently Desert Perpetual only drops higher tier loot on feeded raids. On top of this, upgrade materials now drop from anything in the portal, whereas beforehand, GMs were one of the best sources of Ascendant shards for people good enough to farm them. It feels like as of right now, because the best loot doesn't drop from hard activities, there's no reason to play the hard activities. I know that I've been very critical throughout this video. It's basically just been like 12 or so minutes of me bragging about how the endgame sucks and doesn't exist and is bad, but I don't think it's unsavable. I think the system here can be fixed, largely by updating the loot pools of activities and creating a hard, farmable, skeleton activities for the people who want to do the title as just a one and done, and then for the Omega gamers to just be able to staple their balls to the wall and farm. In addition, I think the tier system needs a massive rethink of how it is implemented. Higher tier loot should drop from higher difficulty activities. I see no reason for raids to drop anything lower than tier 3 loot. Master raids can have tier 4, and then maybe after that they have a chance of tier 5, and then the challenge gives you a +1 gear tier or something. On top of raid adepts, this would actually give players a reason to play master raids again. So, we've been reviewing this game for a month now, because that's how long it took to get all of my thoughts on paper. And we can finally answer the biggest question of all. Is Destiny 2 Edge of Fate worth your hard-earned $40 US? And unfortunately, the answer is probably not. I think that for the average person, the power grind and overall gameplay loop just are not going to be as desirable as other expansions. In addition, hardcore players are finding themselves with very few activities that can challenge them. The casual players are going to be disappointed by the power grind ahead of them, and the dedicated players are going to find themselves without a challenge. So really, nobody's winning. But that may change. Ashen Iron is a potential large content drop, and Bungie has already said that they are looking at tuning passes at the systems that aren't as great, specifically the power grind. Plus, we're entering a new model of content for the game, and unfortunately, we're not going to know if that model pans out until Ashen Iron drops. when that expansion does drop, I will be sure to keep you all updated as to how the state of the game has changed, and whether or not I think the is it worth it judgment call has changed. Bungie said that they're looking at the tuning pass, but again, all that we can do now is really wait. Okay. Big giant yap over. We're finally getting back to our normal song and dance after this. Within the next few weeks here, expect the updated Armor 4.0, 3.0, I don't know what the system is even called at this point, update video. We're going to go over the changes to build crafting with Edge of Fate. And then after that, you'll hopefully see more normal, consistent build videos from this channel. I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.
Another 4
So-
barons.
Anyway, where the hell do we go now?
Hi.
Pop your ass and around the corner.
Yeah.
Okay, gonna be real with you. Been there already. Nice place this time of
I
year.
didn't find it.
Pretty sure that's not where we need to go.